Alright everybody, hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is Justin Sakai and today I will be going over the topic of antibiotic overuse and resistances in both humans and livestock. Antibiotic resistance is a rapidly growing problem around the world and poses a serious risk to global health, and it is our job as scientists to better understand it thoroughly and, more importantly, to work to combat it and control it. So let's hop right in. So in this video, I will be going over what antibiotics are and a little bit of how they work. I will also be covering the main usages of antibiotics in both people and in animals. Um, I will be going over resistances and how resistances occur. And I will also be going over the topic of overuse and misuse of antibiotics. So what are antibiotics? Antibiotics are a very wide range of medications. They specifically target bacteria and bacterial infections. They do not target or work against viruses or viral infections. That is a common misconception with antibiotics, but they only work against bacteria. Antibiotics are generally prescribed usually from doctors, which will tell you to go pick it up from pharmacy, although there are a decent variety of over-the-counter antibiotics that you can get at local pharmacies. A common one that probably everybody has used or heard of at least is Neosporin, which is commonly used on cuts and like scratches. So there are a very wide variety of antibiotics. There are hundreds of active antibiotics that are in use today. Not every single one of them works exactly the same, but there are some similarities in the way they target certain functions of the cell. So the three most common ways, generally antibiotics, some attack the cell wall of the bacteria. Others target reproductive cycles of bacteria, so like translation of mRNA and tRNA. And others will target protein synthesis of bacteria to limit protein function. So, as stated, antibiotics are used for a variety of reasons in both humans and animals. Humans are most commonly given antibiotics to either treat already existing infections, and they are also given antibiotics to prevent future infections. This is a common practice for hospitals. A lot of the time, prescriptions from hospitals will be a wide range of antibiotics to cover all bases. Antibiotics are also a necessary part of surgeries. So pre-surgeries, a lot of times antibiotics are necessary to prevent infections when they are operating. Dialysis is another way that antibiotics are used in hospitals, as well as most knee and joint replacements. And as far as livestock goes, the usages are pretty similar. So farmers will use antibiotics to treat existing infections in livestock populations. They will also use antibiotics to better control infections and to prevent infections from occurring in livestock. And farmers will also use antibiotics as growth boosters to boost growth hormones within their livestock, meaning that they will grow faster in a shorter period of time. So, like I said, there are a very wide variety of antibiotics that are in use. However, there are some common groups of antibiotics or variants of antibiotics that are used. Most common ones are penicillins, cephalosporins, and tetracyclines. The penicillin class of medications, such as amoxicillin, are commonly used to treat pneumonia and meningitis. Cefaclor and cefadroxil are used to treat urinary tract infections or UTIs. And tetracyclines are commonly used to treat most STDs, as well as, interestingly enough, many doctors will prescribe tetracyclines to combat severe acne. So antibiotics are classified sort of into two fashions. Um, this is broken up into what we call broad spectrum antibiotics and narrow spectrum antibiotics. So broad spectrum antibiotics are given to cover a wide variety of possible infections. These include ampicillin, amoxicillin, and all aminoglycosides, which is another sort of category of antibiotics. And then narrow spectrum antibiotics are given to treat a specific diagnosis or a specific bacterial infection. Um, these are some variants of penicillin. There are previous generations of penicillin that are used to treat specific bacterial infections, as well as all macrolides, which is also another subcategory of antibiotics. So, antibiotic resistances or antibacterial resistances. So, what are resistances? So, also known as antimicrobial resistances, or AMR for short. These are a result of antibiotic overuse or misuse, which we'll be covering later in this presentation. AMRs are bacteria that have developed some sort of method of resistance to common drugs that were used to kill said bacteria. So bacteria generally have the ability to adapt and mutate and or mutate given enough time and the correct circumstances, and they create resistances in a few different ways. This can include things like the construction of a biofilm, which is a way that bacteria adapt to survive in certain climates or certain methods, making the bacteria harder to kill in general. They can also mutate to create different enzymes that work to neutralize the antibiotic's effectiveness, and there are a variety of other ways that they can do this. Another common term that we use to describe these bacteria with resistances is superbugs. Superbugs are notoriously dangerous because they resist most commonly used antibiotics, which makes them incredibly hard to get rid of or kill or destroy or to contain. Superbugs pose a very high risk for patients and increase mortality rates amongst common bacterial diagnostics. Um, some of these variants of superbugs are nearly impossible to cure. So there are many superbugs that have developed in the recent years. However, two common ones, or two well-known ones, are MRSA and tuberculosis. So MRSA is a skin infection that can prove fatal if left untreated. Methicillin was the primary antibiotic used to treat MRSA in the past. However, in the recent years, it has proven to be less and less effective. The CDC reports that in 2019, drug-resistant variants of MRSA have led up to a 64% increase in mortality rate amongst those diagnosed with a resistant variant of MRSA. Mycobacterium tuberculosis is also a resistant bacteria that has shown some growth in the past. Tuberculosis is a respiratory infection that poses a very high risk of mortality if not treated within a timely manner. In 1993, it was actually declared a global emergency and even got its own awareness day, which I believe is May 24th. And 60% of patients with resistant tuberculosis variants are not cured or not ever cured. So the CDC reports that in 2019, over 2.8 million antimicrobial resistant infections occur every year, which lead to an estimated 35,000 deaths annually, which is just something to think about as far as the severity of these superbugs and the effect they can have on the global population. So antibiotic resistance in livestock and animals. So, livestock and antibiotics are kind of a notorious couple. Um, Antibiotics have been given to livestock since the 60s, even before in the 50s. They're given to farms around the world, Europe, Asia, America, generally given to prevent common bacterial infections such as E. coli and MRSA. Um, on the left here, I have a little chart that shows sort of the trickle-down way that superbugs will develop in farms and work their way down to the human population. Because a majority of these livestock farms, the livestock is being raised for meat for human consumption, which then gets shipped out globally. So antibiotic methods in livestock. So as stated earlier, antibiotics are prescribed or given out in livestock populations similarly to the way that humans are given antibiotics. So therapeutic antibiotics are given to livestock in order to treat an existing infection. Many times this will be one or two animals out of a population of, say, 100 or so. Prophylactic antibiotics are given as a widespread antibiotic to prevent any sort of spread or development of bacterial infections. And then growth promoters are the notorious one, as they are not completely necessary for the animal's health and are mainly used just to increase growth rates amongst the livestock itself. So now we come to the topic of overuse and misuse. So antibiotics can be prescribed for a variety of reasons. Many times broad-spectrum antibiotics are generally prescribed as a precaution to infection or to inhibit the spread of bacterial infections. As stated earlier, for surgeries and stuff like that, antibiotics are usually widely given there. The CDC reports that 1 in 3 antibiotic prescriptions given by doctors are not completely necessary, as patients generally come in with common symptoms, often get prescribed incorrect antibiotics for what they really have. The livestock industry, on the other hand, is notorious for using antibiotics widely and erratically. Amounts of antibiotics are often given in the form of food to either prevent bacterial infections in a population or as a precautionary measure to ensure the containment of a bacterial infection that already exists. However, the issue with this is that giving livestock constant doses of antibiotics in a very consistent period of time creates a very good environment for bacteria to actually create these resistances. As we saw in the chart earlier, as if all bacterial infections or bacteria in the animals are killed, the only ones that are left are these bacteria that have created these resistances, these superbugs, and they will only multiply from there. So it actually increases and intensifies the concentration of AMRs in that given animal population. So as far as answers go, there are still no concrete or definitive answers to the issue of antibiotic resistances. Researchers are working very hard to make connections between cellular functions such as biofilms and biofilm formations, as well as the way AMRs arise. The World Health Assembly actually adopted the Global Action Plan in 2015, which was set to both further inform the world of these arising resistances, better understand these resistances, and optimize antimicrobial usage globally. And that is the end of my presentation, and I want to thank you for watching and listening.